I want to direct our attention now to the book of Daniel, chapter 1. Daniel, chapter 1, beginning with verse 1. The word of the Lord is as follows. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. He brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel, some of the king's descendants, and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank. 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king. So Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you. The appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies, as you see fit, so deal with your servants. So he consented with them in this matter and tested them 10 days. Then in chapter 3, beginning with verse 13, it reads, Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Thus far, the word of the Lord. You may be seated. I forgot to thank all of the benefactors who have given the scholarships that these students have received, the Gatorade. Can we praise God for them and their generosity? Thank you. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. I want to deal with, for these and for really all of us, from this subject, formed for the moment. Formed for the moment. To these graduates, as we observe and celebrate your achievements today, we do so in recognition of the context in which you have grown. As I looked and listened to the names and watched from the side and then stood and saw to remember many of you from the cradle, others of you from holding on to your mama and daddy's knees, and now seeing you as high school graduates, as college graduates, as master degree graduates, some of you, I'm reminded of the time span. It is a period that has been one of tremendous disruption, upheaval, tragedy, and indeed trauma. For those of you 25 and younger, you haven't known life without TSA security lines. You haven't known a life without having heard the names of Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Trayvon Martin, and the list goes on and on. You haven't known a life that wasn't wired up when you couldn't escape anything. When we were growing up and there was a fight at the school, it stayed at the school. But now with social media, you can't have anything go on at the school and it just stay at the school. It'll be on Instagram and whatever else y'all using. And it's inescapable. So that there is no space, there is no escape, there is no margin. You haven't known a life where terrorism, both domestic and foreign, was only on a TV show. There are those of us who remember the stuff we're seeing in real life now, that was just TV stuff. But now it's real life. You haven't known a life where the possibility of a school shooting was unheard of. Now it's a common reality. And added to tragedy and trauma, disease and disruption is the hypersecularity of our culture, where absolute truth, an objective standard of right and wrong, a sense of moral and ethical order, and an acknowledgement of life being under God have been erased and replaced by subjective truth, relative standards of right and wrong, moral and ethical decay and decline, and the ever-increasing removal of God from being a point of consideration. This is a much different time. And as such, yours has been a generation characterized by anxiety, fear, depression, isolation. And with the aforementioned being shaping influences in your development, your achievement is even more noteworthy. Your attainment, your aspiring, your going is even worth more celebrating. And I believe we just need to give them a hand for their achievements and their attainment and their aspirations and their going forward. It must be said that living with tragedy and trauma, operating with tragedy and trauma, surviving tragedy and trauma, and even advancing and achieving in the midst of tragedy and trauma is nothing new for African Americans, because tragedy and trauma has been the context for black people ever since their arrival on these shores. From captivity in Africa to the Middle Passage to antebellum slavery to post-Reconstruction to Jim Crow to civil rights to now, tragedy and trauma has been the context through which each generation has had to grow. You're not the first generation to deal with tragedy and trauma. Your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, every generation has had to do it, but you have had some added stuff with the social media and with the way in which the society has gone, and the anxieties of being the only one or one of the few, or low expectation and the worst assumed and the least expected has been the continuous lot of African American young people. Yet in each generation, young men and women have transcended, they have achieved, they have not just survived, but they have thrived, and you are among them. And part of the reason why is that they were formed and informed by a relationship with God, directly or indirectly. They were either in church or there was somebody that they were related to who went to church, who had an influence on them and helped form them for the moments that they faced. As I look at you, in some way you have been formed by a church family joining your family in your development. And our task has been to help your family form you in the faith for the moments that you currently face and for the moments that are going to be in your future. Our aim has not been your entertainment. It's been your formation. It's been that Christ might be formed in you, that you might be informed by him, so that when the moments come your way, you'll be ready for anything that comes at you. We do so not just because of the demands of our existential reality, but we also do it because of our history as the people of God. Our history as the people of God gives us accounts of young people having been formed to face trauma and anxiety in hyper-secular environments. They were formed to face the moments that came their way. It's right here in our text. The Babylonian siege of Jerusalem, deportation, and subsequent exile was the most traumatic experience of the people of God up to that present point. And in such a time, a group of young people were born and they were formed. We know them as Daniel and the three Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And we usually read their stories in terms of God's power of deliverance, God being able to bring them out. They're going into the fire and coming out of the fire. They're going into the lion's den and coming out of the lion's den. And that's good. But right now, I want to look at how they were formed to face the moments that came their way. Because you need to understand how you have been formed and how God will continue to form you to face the moments that will come your way. We know that they were the cream of the crop in terms of their pedigree. They were attractive. They were apt in learning. They were quick to understand. They were brought into a 3-year intensive accelerated leadership program that had Babylonian immersion and assimilation at its core so that they might serve the king. And Daniel and the three were among them. It's what happens in verse 8 and following that we see something about the formation that they received before they got to Babylon. And what you hopefully have received before you get to where you're going next. Verse 8 reads, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine that he drank. The appointment of the daily portion of what the king ate and drank was designed to expose them to the taste that the king had. He wanted them to be at home with that which satisfied his appetite. If they were going to serve him well, they didn't just need to know their professional skill set, but they needed to also have their tastes, their desires in line with the king's tastes and the king's desires. And Daniel properly understood that the introduction of the king's food was an attempt to alter their appetites, to alter their tastes, to alter their sensibilities to that of the king's. It was a subtle way of moving them away from an appetite for God. Having purpose in his heart not to eat from the king's menu, he requested that the eunuch allow them to put the diet of God to the test. Because Daniel knew that this was not about diet, it was about devotion. Daniel understood that the introduction of the king's diet was designed to align him with the king's desires. It was designed to alter his appetite. It was designed to shift his devotion. You see, whatever you find yourself consuming the most, that is what you'll find yourself desiring even more. Whatever you allow to have space and room in your mind and in your spirit, that is what you will find your spirit and your mind beginning to desire even the more. Daniel's formation alerted him to the connection between identity and appetite, devotion and diet. It goes all the way back to the garden, with God having set the diet for the man and the woman, saying, you may take and eat of any of the fruit of any of these trees except the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So they got all this for their diet except one thing. But then in comes the tempter, who introduces an addition to the diet. He introduces the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In other words, he says, God's diet is not enough. You need to add one more thing to your diet. And the writer of Genesis says, when the woman saw that it was good for food, pleasant to the eye, and desirous to make one wise, she ate it and gave it to her husband, and he ate. And they failed to discern the connection between appetite and identity, diet and devotion. Daniel and the boys, they were deeply formed in terms of their identity as children of God and of their primary devotion to God. Though they were in Babylon, and though they were brought into this immersion program to serve the king, they understood that even before their service to Nebuchadnezzar was their service, their devotion, their commitment to God. And the diet was one of the reinforcements of their identity and their devotion. He recognized that the matter was deeper than what he wanted to eat. It was a matter of who he understood himself to be. It wasn't a matter of whether the food tasted good or not. It was a matter of who he understood himself to be as a child of God. And being formed for the moment is being deeply rooted in your identity as a child of God, because there may be many things that look good, taste good, sound good, feel good, that may not be in alignment with your identity as a child of God. It's being firmly planted in terms of who you are in relationship to God. And I just want to remind everybody, not just these who are graduates, but everybody who you are as a child of God. You were made in his image and after his likeness. You were made a little lower than the angels and crowned with glory and honor. You are fearfully and you are wondrously made. You are the apple of the eye of God. You are God's workmanship, God's masterpiece. You were created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that you should walk therein. You are a citizen not just of this world, but you are a citizen of heaven, an unshakable kingdom that cannot be moved. You are a chosen generation. You are a royal priesthood. You are a holy nation. You are a peculiar people that you should show forth the glory of him that has called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. You're an heir of God. You are a joint heir with Jesus Christ. You've been made to sit in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. In him you are the head and you are not the tail. You are more than a conqueror through Christ who loved you. Your understanding of who you are in relation to God should inform your choices and your actions. That is because you know who you are. You know what you should and should not do. It's the matter of convictions. Notice, if you will, it says that Daniel purposed in his heart. This wasn't a taste thing. This wasn't even a mind thing. This was a heart thing. It's the matter of convictions. It's the matter of what is deeply formed in you. You see, convictions form us, and convictions constrain us. Now, that might be a message that the former president might need to get. Convictions form us, and convictions constrain us. Deeply held convictions inherently raise the question, given who I am, given whose I am, given what I believe, how should I behave in a given situation? Convictional formation is not just about freedom, it's also about constraints, because convictions set boundaries. Convictions alert you and tell you when and where the line is drawn and where you just can't go. Convictional formation settles you in who you are and whose you are and what you believe and where you can't go. And sometimes convictional formation will tell you, I can't go for that. Oh, no can do. I can't go for that. No. Convictional formation brings some constraint. Am I talking to anybody? Is there anybody who knows of times when you were in situations, in places, in and around people, and they were trying to get you to go certain things and do certain things and be a certain way, and you were right at the edge, but then your conviction rose up. And you said, no, player, I can't go that far. Yeah, I'm here, but I can't go that far. Because convictional formation puts some constraints on you. And I believe that there's somebody who can look at some of those fools that you used to hang out with, and you look at where they are and you see where you are, and you are so glad that you had put some constraints. Anybody glad that God put some brakes on you? Anybody glad that God touched you upside your head, snatched you by the neck, pulled you out of that situation? Because convictions constrain. Formed for the moment. Formed for the moment. You see, the depth of formation is revealed at the point of testing. And tests come in different ways. Everybody isn't tested the same way. The boys will have the furnace. Daniel will have the lion's den, different types. But tests do come. And in this instance, it comes as Daniel and the boys are at the king's table. It is as they have access to privilege and power. They're at the king's table. They're with the big baller and the shot caller. And they got access to power and privilege. But the formation of Daniel and the boys was such that they were grounded in who they were when where they were changed. You see, integrity is being who you are regardless of where you are. It's who you are regardless of where you are. And they were who they were when where they were changed. Where they were did not change who they were. You ever been around people who get brand new in certain places? And you like, wait, I know that can't be. Daniel purposed in his heart not to eat the king's food because what one does at the table reveals the location of one's heart. Not the taste of your tongue, the location of your heart. And for Daniel, his heart was less concerned about his place at the table and more concerned with his place before God. And with that in mind, he was willing to risk losing a place at the table because his place with God was more important. His devotion was to the person of God rather than to the place at the table. And it's sad to say that there are some who will lose their devotion because they want a place. They like a place at certain tables. And there will be certain tables that you as high schoolers now going into college that you may want to have a place at, and you will be tempted to put your devotion to God on the back burner so that you can have a place at the table. I want to be a frat. I want to be a soror. I want to be down with the crew. And there's nothing wrong. No, I ain't hating on frat. I ain't hating on sororities. But I'm saying none are worth your lowering who you are in God to get there. Now they all claim that they got some connection to God. They all claim that. Yeah, we know God. Well, if they know God, they should appreciate your devotion to God. And you should not have to give up your devotion to be a bruh or to be a sis. His devotion to the person of God was rather than the place at the table. He was willing to risk being disinvited from Nebuchadnezzar's table because his desire was to behold the beauty of the Lord, to inquire in the Lord's temple. The aim of your formation has been to create a desire and devotion to God that equips you to sit at any table and be confident in who you are in and with God, knowing that at any time, at any table, you will be put to a test. The table of belonging will put you to a test. The table of popularity will put you to a test. The table of access to power will put you to the test. The table of economic opportunity will put you to the test. The table of scarcity will put you to the test. The table of sickness will put you to the test. Anybody been at any of those tables? And don't mind telling everybody, yeah, that table will put you to the test. I don't care how high it is, how good it looks, how well it's set. It will put you to the test. But Daniel's formation gives him something to use. He's got a diet. And he puts the diets to the test. And while that's what he told the chief eunuch, he was doing more than testing diets. He was testing devotion. He put his devotion to God on the line. And in his doing so, he gave God space to show himself to everybody who was at the table. And at the end of the time of testing, Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael appeared better and stronger than those whom the king offered. You see, the devil always wants to get you to believe that if you do it God's way, you'll be less than those who do it the world's way. But what Daniel and the boys show us is that every time you do it God's way, you will always end up better than those that do it the world's way. God came through and showed himself faithful. God blessed them and gave them unique gifts and abilities such that they gained favor with the king himself. There was nobody like them in the king's eyes. Even though they weren't eating the king's food, they had favor in the king's eyes. I want somebody to know you don't have to stoop down to the world's level to get favor in the world's eyes, because God is in control of it all. And God says, if you honor me, I will honor you. Am I talking to anybody in here? Is there anybody who can say there were those who thought that I wasn't going to get anywhere because they called me square, they called me old-fashioned, they said that my standards weren't in line with the business's operation, but I decided I was going to trust God. I decided I was going to honor him. I decided I was going to acknowledge him in all his ways and let him direct my paths. And now I'm their supervisor. Now I'm their manager. Now I'm the one who's calling the shots. And I did not have to give up anything to get there, because God is the one who elevates you. God is the one who promotes you. God is the one who makes ways for you. Their devotion to God did not lessen them, it furthered them. You see, the times of testing at the table are times designed for you to trust what God gives you for the test. It's the time for you to trust the promises that God makes you and God makes for you. It's the time for you to trust the testimonies that you've heard your parents or your grandparents or your guardians or your aunts or your uncles or your brothers or your sisters say about God. It's the time for you to trust what you've seen God do in the lives of those around you. It's the time that you create space for God to show you who he is. It's the time for you and those watching you to be blown away by what God does on your behalf. I mean, I'm looking at some of you who have received these multiple scholarships, and I know if it doesn't blow anybody, it blew your mind about how God has provided. It probably blew your parents' minds what God has done. Am I talking to anybody who doesn't mind testifying, God blew my mind? God blew the minds of those around me. As a matter of fact, when I was knocked down and people thought that I was down for a count, and God brought me up and he took me higher than I was before I went down, it blows everybody's mind. God, you found God to be good at any table. You can testify he gave you exactly what you needed for the table that confronted you. He gave you the wisdom that was needed for the table. He gave you discernment that was needed for the table. He gave you insight that was needed for the table. He gave you calm that was needed for the table. He gave you sanity that was needed for the table. He gave you courage that was needed for the table. He gave you what you needed. He put food on the table. That's a shout for somebody right now. And when you were surrounded by enemies who thought that they were going to do you harm, he prepared a table in the presence of your enemies, and he anointed your head with oil, and your cup ran over, and you were confident that goodness and mercy had your back all the days of your life. God is good for it. So as you proceed into this next chapter of life, whether into college or into the military, out of college, please know there is no table to which you will go that God will not give you what you need. And I want you to understand, growth in God will let you know that some tables just ain't worth it. Any table that would seek to separate you from God and who you are in God is not the table for you. Some tables you walk away from because the juice just ain't worth the squeeze. And you do so confident that God has other spaces for you. I'm talking to some people who had to walk away from some tables. And the enemy caused you to think, you're going to walk away from that? And you say, yep. The enemy say, where you going? I don't know, but I'm not going there. Because the juice just ain't worth the squeeze, baby. And then God brought you to a table that you didn't even know about, could not have imagined, introduced it your way. It wasn't on your resume. You didn't have the pedigree for it. But God said, I'll prepare a table for you. I'll make the way for you. And God did just that. That's chapter 1. But then chapter 3 comes around. We see another aspect of their formation play itself out. We know that story. King has built a statue. He's assigned a certain day. And on that day, everybody is to bow down. The Hebrew boys are there. And we are given the names or the categories of everybody who's there. And that causes us to understand everybody who's got access and proximity to the king, everybody who's supposed to be somebody, is bowing except these 3 boys. They refused to bow. They chose to stand. And in that moment, they realized what really mattered. That moment was about who they were and in whom they placed their trust. Their standing was a demonstration of what matters to them. It wasn't their place at the table. It was their position with God. It was their commitment to God. It was their faithfulness to God. Why? Because God had been faithful to them. Nebuchadnezzar asked, who is the God who's going to deliver you from my hand? He doesn't believe what he's heard. He gives them another chance to bow with the repeated ramifications of their choice, life outside the furnace or life inside the furnace. He's betting on the fact that their fear of being inside the furnace is going to be greater than their fidelity to God. He believed the core of their fidelity to be circumstantial, that is, what things happen and what things are kept from happening, and thus subject to manipulation by the threat of difficulty. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego surprise him with their answer. We are not careful to answer you in this matter. If it be so, the God that we serve is able, and he will deliver us out of your hands, O king. But even if he doesn't, we will not bow down. We will not serve. It does not make a difference to us. We will not serve your gods. We will not worship the gold statue that you have set up. In the face of severe consequences, they assert their faithfulness to God. Why? Because they know something about this God. Their God is the God who overcame Pharaoh and Egypt at the Red Sea. Their God is the God who was a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. Their God who is the one who gave them manna that flowed down from heaven every day and brought water from a rock. Their God is the God who brought them through the Jordan River and brought the walls of Jericho down before them. Their God was the God who gave them cities that they did not build, and vineyards that they did not plant, and wells that they did not dig. Their God was the God whose favor and hand was upon them, giving them victory and provision. And whatever the ramifications were, they say, our commitment to God is sure. Formation for the moment. What we've tried to do is to empower you to choose faithfulness to God over fear of circumstances based upon who you know God to be. It's the time of crisis at the table, the times of testing in the position that you hold, that it pays to know God. It pays to know God is greater. It pays to know that God is more than enough. It pays to be able to say, like the Apostle Paul, I know in whom I have believed, and I'm persuaded that he's able to keep what I've committed unto him against that day. Ours has been the aim to form you in knowing who God is to such a degree that you're able to say, the God that I serve is an able God. And let me remind you who your God is. Your God is the one that created the heavens and the earth from absolutely nothing. Your God is the one who upholds all things by the word of his power. Your God is not just the God who delivered Israel from Egypt and from the Assyrian and Babylonian captivity, but your God is the God who brought your ancestors across the Atlantic. Your God is the God that was greater than the slave masters, greater than Jim Crow, greater than the red shirts, greater than the Ku Klux Klan, greater than the Dred Scott decision, greater than Plessy versus Ferguson, greater than George Wallace, greater than Herman Talmadge in Georgia, greater than Strom Thurmond in South Carolina, greater than Jim Eastland and John Stennis in Mississippi, greater than Lee Harvey Oswald. Your God is the God that was greater than apartheid in South Africa. Your God is the greater God. Am I talking to anybody who knows that your God is greater? Are you able to say, greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world? Is there anybody who can testify that you've been formed for the moment and you know that God is greater in the face of the most challenging, in the worst that has come your way, in the darkest of the seasons of your life? Have your God been greater? You know your God to be greater than that disappointment, greater than that disruption, greater than that diagnosis, greater than the divorce, greater than the disease, greater than the breakup, greater than the breakdown. Your God has been greater than the layoff, greater than the chemo, your God has been greater. Your God has been greater. Your God is greater. And can I talk to just one more young person who was formed for the moment at the age of 12? He was formed for the moment. Look at him in the temple saying, didn't you know that I must be about my Father's business? He was formed for the moment, identifying identity with appetite and diet with devotion. From the tempter tried to get him and say, I know that you're hungry. If you be the Son of God, turn these stones into bread, trying to tie identity with appetite. But Jesus said, I picked your card. It is written that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God the Father. He was formed for the tempting moment. Look at him, my God, when he fears for his life. I mean, he's so fearful that he goes into a garden and he has to pray so hard that sweat pours like drops of blood. And he says, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. But he's got a convictional formation. And so he says, let me put a constraint on that. Nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done. He was formed for the moment. He knew that he had come into this world to be wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquity, chastened for our peace, and to have stripes for our healing. And so he says, I give myself to your plan because I'm formed for the moment. And I know, God, that you are greater. You are greater than the betrayal. You are greater than Peter's denial. You are greater than my being beaten all night long. You are greater than the crown of thorns that's going to be put on my head. You are greater than the cross that's going to be put on my shoulder. You are greater than the nails that are going to be put in my hand. You are greater than the gravity that's going to pull me down. You are greater than the spear that's going to be pierced in my side. You are greater than the darkness between the 6th and the 9th hour. You are greater than my giving up the ghost. You are greater than death. You are greater than hell. You are greater than the grave. And so into your hands I commend my spirit because I believe that you're greater. And the Father said, I'm going to show you how great I am. I'm going to let you die on Friday. I'm going to let them say that it's all over. I'm going to let them have a party on Saturday, because if I get to Sunday, Lord have mercy. If I get to Sunday, I'm able to raise you up with all power in my hand. And so early Sunday morning, God raised Jesus with power in his hand, and that Jesus is on your side. And because you know Jesus for yourself, you're able to say, I serve a greater God. I serve a greater God. And I can testify, if God be for you, who can be against you? Nay, in all these things, we're more than conquerors. I can bear witness that God is greater. He is the able God. And that God is your God. You don't serve no weak God. You serve a mighty God. You serve a great and awesome God. You serve a God who has already seen who you are supposed to be. He has already said what you are supposed to accomplish. And he is the one who writes and orders and directs your steps. He ain't making this thing up as you go. He's already written it. And he says, if you will just trust in me, I'll do great and mighty things. I'll take you places you didn't even know existed. I'll bring you into levels you didn't know that you did not even imagine for yourself. I will make enemies become your footstool, because that is the God that I am. So glory to your name, God. Glory to your name. Glory to your name, God. Glory to your name, God.